I'd like you to think about maybe a subject for the first map that you actually create. Because this course, we're going to go into maps that, as I mentioned in the video, that other people have made. We're going to modify those, but we're also going to actually make some yourself. Now, one of the things that I think is a nice way of getting into this is you can make a story map of your own pathway, right? So you saw some of the organizations that I've worked for, Census, NOAA, etc. in the past. I teach here at BU in the OLLI program. I'm a big fan. I also teach in the University College GIS program, the Geographic Information Systems program. But what if you made a story map, which is a multimedia map that we're all going to make together in a little while, of some of the highlights of your career? Let's say you have a resume, you have a CV, maybe some of it's online. Well, what if you made a story map of your CV or your resume? So here's part of mine right here. So I've got some geeky photos and some things that I really believe in about getting onto the landscape and so on and so forth, and a couple of videos in there. This is me in Australia. Good eye, mate. All down Australia last year. Good on you. So that's what that's all about. This is basically a separate URL that is actually a story, what we call a story map, a multimedia map that tells a story. Now, maps have been used to tell stories for thousands of years, right? And most of it, you could put photos, videos, etc. in there, as you saw. But here's some geeky photos. Here's me on a big map. I mean, what's not to love? So the point is that you've got some capabilities there that you have at your fingertips. Now, how many of you did some geeky things when you were a teenager or a young person?
Are you kidding?
No, not you guys. No. I made maps. This is one of my maps on big poster boards. So I kind of go way back into the 20th century with this stuff. So I used colored pencil. I made up names of cities and street names and railroads and all kinds of stuff. So that's one of the maps I made when I was a teenager. So here are 7 key themes of our course today. First of all, as I mentioned briefly earlier, nanotechnologies, geotechnologies, and biotechnologies were identified by the U.S. Department of Labor as being key fields for the 21st century, with a lot of job growth and a lot of energy behind. And we are going to be firmly anchored in this geotechnology world today. And the geotechnologies include web mapping, web-based mapping, as we're getting into right now, geographic information systems, remember a database behind a set of maps. Also remote sensing, looking at the Earth from satellites or aircraft. Two of the hot fields in remote sensing these days are Lidar, light detection and ranging. So with an aircraft, you can bounce a laser off the surface and get a Lidar image. And from that Lidar image, you can create surfaces, trees, light poles, buildings, and you can model and use it for city planning and for a variety of other things. You can do like bare earth versus vegetation tops and see how much of the Pike National Forest was scorched this summer. So LIDAR is a big one. Drones, right? UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles or unmanned aerial systems. UAS is another term. So that's big as well. Advantages of that, you've got the capability of actually operating one yourself, right, with a license. So people can actually take that remote sensing themselves rather than relying on an aircraft company or a digital globe or another satellite image company to actually, to actually sense the Earth. They can actually do that themselves for a small area and a super high resolution. So some of these satellite images that we're looking at, like if I had zoomed into the Great Sand Dunes, that probably would have been about 1 meter pixel in terms of spatial resolution. So every little pixel, you know what I mean by pixel, right? If you zoom in on a photograph, right, and you see the little pixelation of that photograph, if it's black and white or color, right? So in terms of a remotely sensed image, that little pixel is 1 meter probably in the Great Sand Dunes. But with a UAV, right, it's only a couple hundred feet high. And so you can take images, for example, of the DU campus or a new interchange that's being planned or a mine or a patch of forest or whatever people are interested in mapping at 10 centimeters or 5 centimeters. So it's going to be super high resolution. Lots of big data. We'll talk about big data in a bit. And the last component is GPS, global positioning systems, right? Since that gives us our location on the planet, it's very much tied to this geotechnologies. Now, why use it in your instruction? Well, here are a couple reasons that I just wanted to lay out there for you to sort of chew on, sort of think about as we go through our course today, but it's really about fostering spatial thinking and critical thinking. It's not about turning your students into geotechnology geeks, right? Because you're not teaching geotechnology. You're teaching history, you're teaching art, you're teaching great moments of the 20th century, right? You're teaching whatever you're teaching, right? And some of you are filling out that survey. But it's all about critical thinking. And if you want to bring mapping pieces, you know, I got this old textbook from like 1975, and the map of Europe is like this big. Am I stuck with that in my OLLI course? No. Just let me illustrate. So let's say I want to teach, and I want to, for my course, I've got a need for showing, I don't know, major river systems of the world, okay? And I want to do it interactively. So if I go to this ArcGIS platform, arcgis.com, and I go to map, how do I modify the map? Well, I want to change this map, so I'm going to go to modify map in the upper right. This just as an illustration of one of the things you can do. And notice this add button here on the left now. I want to add some data. I want to add hydrography, rivers. So if I go and search for layers, and I'm going to look at, I don't know, world hydrography. Ooh, look, I've got several choices, and I'm going to add this one. This looks good because I can see some outlines of rivers and stuff, and I can read about the metadata behind the map. Remember, don't just take it because it exists. Look at who created it, why it was created, more about that in a bit. So we've got metadata in here. I never metadata I didn't like. That was just a little geo joke there for you folks. But see, now we've got basically, let's zoom out even more. So now we've got major rivers of the planet, and you guys know from what we were looking at before, this is the same kind of base map, so I can even change it to light gray canvas. And look, now I just see truly major rivers. I don't have anything else, and I can even take off these country boundaries. So these are all modifiable. And as I zoom in, though, notice I'm getting more detail. So that's what's exciting about today's digital mapping tools. Many of them are scalable, and as I zoom in even more, I'm getting more tributaries, and now I've got even some dashed lines. What are these dashed lines? Like this one right here, and this one right here in Colorado. Watershed boundaries, awesome. So here's the Rio Grande, right? And the Colorado, the North Platte. So you can see the watershed boundaries in here. You've got the Palmer Divide right here between Denver and Colorado Springs where the Arkansas drainage is down here. And if I go in even further, I'm going to see the sub-watershed boundaries. Oh gosh, and now I'm seeing all kinds of tributaries. So I'm teaching about, let's say, I don't know, mining in Colorado, and some of the ways that the miners got up to the mines there and how they got water into, you know, processing the ore and so on. And I'm just pulling up this. I don't want anything else on here except rivers and maybe a couple of other like political boundaries here. If I wanted to add some additional layers, I could. So that's what I'm talking about here is you've got this instant customizable set of wonderful maps and tools, more about the tools part in a bit. Yes?
Over time, rivers will change their course. Is it possible to say, I want to see what it looked like in 1850?
Sure. On this particular one, we'd have to add and search for a historical map, keeping in mind the scale being what you're seeking might not have been mapped at that scale in the time that you want. Right. So let's illustrate another tool. This was going to be, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, but here, same kind of thing. Here we've got something, this is only about a month and a half old, this way back service. So let's say you're teaching and you want to look at change over time. Now this is only if you're seeking about a really high resolution, you want to look at really fine detail. In other words, scale matters, right? So let's say we want to do something at a really large scale, right? Now this is where our everyday speech kind of gets in the way, because usually when people say large scale, they talk about a large scale study, they mean like global study, right? With mapping, a large scale means super fine detail, right? In other words, 1 to 1,000 scale or 1 to 2,000 scale, or this is 1 to 24,000 scale, as probably most of you know, right? So pretty large scale, you can see a lot of detail, not very much area, but a lot of detail. So that's what we mean by large scale map. A small scale map, you mentioned global maps. A small scale map is you can see a lot of area, but not very much detail. Yeah, so that's a small scale map. Large scale map is kind of, think about it as looking like right up next to it, really, really closely. Okay, so here, large scale data, fine level of detail. This is called the Wayback Service, and it's linked to that presentation, but it starts with Las Vegas because, as we all know, Las Vegas, lots of change. Thank you very much. There's lots of change in the last few years, right? Last few decades, really. And if I go to the Wayback Service and I say only updates with local changes, in other words, give me the dates where the imagery shows some changes. Now I can click on these individual dates, and this is brand new, so it's being, updated as we speak, but you can go back to 2014 right now, and you can see how things have changed as I kind of pan through these different dates up to 2018 just for the southwest part of Las Vegas. But that's not all, right? If I look at, I don't want to look at Las Vegas, I want to look at, how about Broomfield, closer to home. So if I look at Broomfield and, north part of Denver, let's go over here, okay? So only updates with local changes. So if I go to 2014, notice this right here, right? And what did it turn into? What is that thing? It's a big apartment complex. This is our building right here, by the way. Unfortunately for the people on the north side of our building, their view is totally blocked out of the beautiful view they used to have all the way to Fort Collins, but you can see the changes just in that area. So this is called the Wayback Service, and guess what? This is global. So for those of you that have taken a Geographic Information Systems course, like we talked about with a couple of you before this, you were always worried about, is it in the right map projection, and can I get all those layers to overlay, and having this kind of thing at your fingertips. So if you wanted to look at coastal erosion or the construction of a reservoir, or you were teaching about China and look at the Three Gorges Dam, all those villages that were displaced, you name it, center pivot irrigation in the middle of Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's lots of things you can look at in terms of change. And that's why we want to use mapping tools, right? Because the Earth is a dynamic planet. What's that?
How far does it go back?
Yeah, this particular service is brand new. It goes back to basically 2014. So you're only looking at about 4 years here. But still, if you want to go back farther, there is another one, again, linked to the presentation here. But let me just skip ahead on that one as well. And let's look at the, here's the presentation that I'm kind of walking through here. We'll talk about spatial thinking here in a bit. All maps are wrong, many are useful. We'll come back to this, right? What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that?
By the time it's done, something's changed.
Okay, so change over time. Maps are snapshots, even digital maps, unless they're updated in real time, which some of them are. Wildfires, earthquakes, stream gauging stations from the USGS fed into this mapping platform. So there are many maps these days that are updated in real time or near real time, but if they're not, there'll be a snapshot, even with Wayback Service, right? You saw that was, the last image was like a month old. So we don't have a digital video feed from a satellite yet. Won't that be interesting for location privacy and all these other issues that we'll talk about later on when we do actually have something like that, when it will be real time? Interesting. More about that in a bit. But another reason why all maps are imperfect or wrong, right? We've got a three-dimensional Earth, correct? It's an oblate spheroid, right? So it's longer this way, it's wider this way than it is this way around the poles, correct? So it's a little bit squashed. Not as much as Jupiter or Saturn, right? The gas giants, but it is a little bit wider this way. Okay, so we're squashing that onto a two-dimensional map or a two-dimensional computer screen, even if we have a 3D scene, which we'll look at in a bit. So you've got projection issues. How are you going to project the Earth onto some sort of system, whether it's digital or paper or film or wood blocks or whatever you had in the past, right? Copper plates and all the stuff that we used to use for mapping. How are you going to project that three-dimensional Earth and preserve area and distance and shapes and all of that sort of thing? Well, we do that with map projections. So map projections juggle all these things and come up with the best way to show the Earth. If you are really interested in this subject, folks, I've got this blog called Spatial Reserves, which came out of a book I wrote on data quality on mapping. In other words, when you're starting to use some of these maps with your course, I really want you to dig into the metadata. If there is some maps have none. They have no data saying who made it and why it was made. You really should be suspicious of that, right? Because, again, there's this deluge of data nowadays, right, folks? And there's a lot of bad maps out there. There's a lot of good maps out there, but there's a lot of bad maps and web feeds even. Look at this. I know it gets hot in Texas, but here's one of my favorite examples. So this actually was one of the weather feeds on a map, and it was there for about a year before someone fixed it. It feels like 3277 degrees. It's really only 3276 degrees, so no worries there, right? I know it's windy in Texas too. Look at this, gusts up to 255 miles an hour. The precipitation, it's raining hard. That is a massive amount of rain. Look at the humidity is off the charts. It's not even possible to have that much of a humidity anyway. But look, it's up dated 8 seconds ago. It's got to be good. No, so be critical of the data. I've got lots of other horrible examples. Some of the ones that I hate the most, let me just say this, just to get it off my chest, okay, are the favorite foods in every state, or favorite X in every state, or who makes the most money in every state, right? Some of those have an N value, you know, a survey value of extremely low. It's like you know that they just surveyed the people in their office, right? Do you like corn? Are you from Iowa? We'll put Iowa down for corn, okay? You know, they're not even scientific. They're just meant to generate either people getting a little bit mad or click-throughs, right? So they're meant as like eye candy so that you can, because maps are very compelling, right? That's why we're all in this class. We love maps. They're very compelling. And so if you have a map oftentimes on a page, it directs people to whatever other content you want them to look at. So there's a lot of horrible, what's that?
Clickbait.
There you go. Horrible examples of these that you can see in my Beware of Bad Maps. Okay. Getting into some of these tools, let's look at, I'm going to skip down, I'm going to come back, but I'm going to skip down to this USGS Historical Topo Map Viewer because someone was asking about, oh, I want to go back in time a little bit more. So you can see that this is called a web mapping application. In other words, unlike the maps that we looked at earlier that you could modify, right? That's called a web map. So you can change it. You can save it, you can change it, you can add data to it, like we added the hydro for the world. An application kind of goes on top of that. So this is a web mapping application. This may seem a little bit too geeky for you, but bear with me because the reason why it's important is because the web maps are like they're like the Lego bricks. Okay, you can add things and take away things. The web mapping application is like the Lego building that someone has taken like polyurethane and superglued it all. So you can't change it. I suppose if you took a hammer. But the basic idea is you can't change it. It's very useful, but you can't modify it. It's basically how the person that created it left it. And I want you to think about, all the instructor that I am, I can actually create some of these. I don't have to just consume the ones that other people have made. I can actually create my own, and we'll do that here in the class. But this is a very useful one because the folks in my organization, Environmental Systems Research Institute, or ESRI, and the USGS got together and scanned in all of the USGS topo sheets, and all the historical ones too. Ooh, so I can go to, let's say, I don't know, Morrison, Colorado, okay? And if I go over to, just pan over to the north where I-70 goes up into the mountains through that road cut, okay, right up in there. Let's say I click in there, and I get this flow diagram of this timeline. And so if I click over here, ooh, I've got a 1938 Morrison. And notice the scale on the left. So the different scales at different years, right? So we've got a 1938 Morrison map. And if I click on there, oh, well, look at that. The way I got into the mountains back in 1938 was I had to go west on Highway 6 or US 40, right, Colfax. I go over on, remember where Heritage Square was? I go on the north side of that hogback, and then at Mount Vernon Canyon, I turn up into the mountains. And then you can see, look at this, I've got a little transparency tool on this map, and if I make it sort of semi-transparent, I can start seeing the lighting is a little bit high in here. We could turn it down. Should we turn it down? Why don't we? Is that going to be okay for the video?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Ooh, mood lighting. You guys okay with your devices?
Yeah.
Okay, now check this out. We've got, you can see a little bit of the the old and a little bit of the new now because I've got the transparency. Maybe it's a little bit too much of the new. But let's bump it back just a little bit. Ah, look at that. So here's the 1938, and then I've got basically a 2018 base map behind it. Wow. Okay, what can I do with this? A couple things. I can use it as is. I can add more years, right? If I want to look at, okay, what did it look like in the mid-60s when the Beatles were playing at Red Rocks? Cool. I can add that one, and I'm going to have another map over here. I can also download these. They're going to be big TIFF files, TIFF files, and you can put that in, you know, a PowerPoint or any sort of graphics program and show it, okay? But you can also use it online. And it's USA, right? It's the USGS topo. So can I do this for Mongolia? No. You can use the Wayback Service with the satellite images, but for this particular application, it is the USA. But still, you've got you've got like 55,000, 1 to 24,000 scale sheets alone, plus multiple tens of thousands of historical sheets at your fingertips. This is better than, you know, The Lord of the Rings, my precious. This is awesome. This is incredible. What you've got at your fingertips here, folks. We could spend the rest of the time looking at Mono Lake, Plano, Texas, where there's massive amounts of urban, I mean, you think there's urban sprawl in Denver, right? Who's been north of Dallas? Plano, Texas. Right? It just goes on, and pretty much you're in Oklahoma before it stops. So we can look at urban sprawl. We can look at, someone talked about meandering rivers. We can look at changes in rivers over time based on these old topographic maps. Oh, wonderful that we've got this at our fingertips. So basically I went to the site, and it's, again, linked to my page. I go to the place I want to go, I click in the map, and then I've got this timeline of when the maps were. Look, here's Alameda Parkway, nothing else around it, no Lakewood back then. So, again, we could spend the whole rest of the class period with just this tool alone. It's just so wonderful. Yes?
I'm looking to try to see how I would export this to put it into a PowerPoint.
Yep. Right, so on the left side there, then you can download the map. Yep, and then that's going to be a big GeoTIFF, big TIFF file that's actually georeferenced. Did you click in the map first? Hi.
Hi. In developing a class on Colorado electric bike riding for seniors. And what I'd like to do is to find those areas where you can ride along the stream.
Nice.
Winter Park,
Cool.
Glenwood Springs to Aspen, and back on a
Yeah.
railroad track, you know, and so forth. And then to have them say, well, we're going to travel to Idaho. How do we find where there are bike trails for seniors?
Yep.
Boise along the river.
Right. I would say in brief, place to start would be this data blog of mine,
Okay.
Spatial Reserves, because it is all about data, where to find it, how do you know if it's any good, etc. The second thing I would advise is go to that arcgis.com site and add data, as we did, and search for the layers that you want. Look for bikeways, look for, etc. Those would be the two things I'd say right away. We could have a whole class on seeking data, but those would be the two things I would start with. More about that in a bit, because we're going to go into something else that might be valuable for you called the Living Atlas. All right, so we're back on our presentation, and I skipped over a couple things, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep on rolling. One of the things that is exciting to me about today's mapping world is, again, because you've got these databases tied to these maps. It's no longer just a bunch of pretty graphics, right? And one of them is, well, a whole set of these things are in 3 dimensions, because we've got a 3-dimensional planet, and it makes sense that we want to map some things in 3D. So we'll just delve into a couple of tools right here. This is one of my favorite new ones. It's this migration over space and time. Now, this is part of this gallery called the Cool Maps Gallery. And the Cool Maps Gallery, as the name implies, is all cool stuff. And this is about visualizing international migration. So I really want to understand, let's say I'm teaching a class on out-migration, in-migration, comparing the amounts, but also the destination countries and the receiving countries. And if I view map there, okay, that's not active, no worries. If I view map, it's going to give us a little bit of metadata okay, about where this came from. Again, this isn't perfect, but it's from the 2013 revision to the Trends in International Migrant Stock from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Now, I used to work for the Census Bureau, and even if you didn't work for the Census Bureau, you folks know that census data, including median age, migration, right, it's fraught with imperfections. Very useful, though, but there are some people that are undercounted, right? There are people that are overcounted. Many countries don't have a national census, so the UN is estimating, right, the amount of, in this case, the migration. So we always have to say, when you're teaching with this in your courses, according to the data that we have at our fingertips. That's the key phrase, I think, to use. According to this data set, and we have a librarian here, so you feel free to correct me, but the idea is you've got these things that okay, I've weighed this, and this one doesn't have very much information about it. It looks good, but I really can't trust it, and how do I decide? There's all these things that you're grappling with, but according to the data set, I think is a good thing to say, because according to the UN Trends in International Migrant Stock, we've got this tool at our fingertips. And what I love about it is that you've got this really nice cartography. So it's very subtle, right? It's got the dark gray base map, we call it. So you're not seeing a lot of relief on the land, because you really want to focus on the migration, international migration in this case. And let's say I taught in the UAE a couple times, and as you probably know, they have a huge amount of international workers there, right? That built Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and along with some locals for sure. But so there's a lot of people moving there. And notice at the bottom of this, we've got change over time. So I've got 1990, 2000, 2010, and 2013. So notice how the amount changes. So you've got 2013 migrants to 7 million, whereas in 1990 it was 1 million. And you've also got the global figures as well. But really fascinating. 33 countries to the UAE in 2013, and back in 1990, it looks like it was the same in terms of this data set. What about outbound? Do people actually move from the UAE to other places? Well, some of them are on the other side of the planet. So in this case, sometimes the 2D map is actually better. So if we change it back to 2D, sometimes I think it's visually a little bit more compelling. So let's say we want to look at a place like Somalia. Now, what's your hypothesis on Somalia? You've got inbound here, and let's look at 2013. So people actually do move there, but look at how low the number was. 2,000. Okay, that's about the amount of students in that next block over there, right? Why? What's your hypothesis about outbound? Is it going to be more than inbound or less? More. Okay. Why? Knowing what you know about Somalia. Okay, so there's political instability, drought, famine, and this is what I like to get students to think about. Okay, well, it looks like your hypothesis was correct. There are more, but why doesn't everybody leave if it's so bad? So get the students to think about things like, how bad would it have to get to be in Denver or Colorado or the USA for you to leave, for you to totally leave the country? So there's that. There's sense of place and there's attachment, but there's also, what's the other factor preventing outward migration? Yeah, do you have the means to leave? Okay, so there's also a lot of other factors, right? But it's just fascinating to be able to look at this. And I was teaching, as you saw earlier, at the time I was teaching in Australia last year, it had the highest in terms of any country above 10 million, the highest percentage of immigrants. And as you probably know, the immigrants to Australia have changed over the years, right? 100 years ago, it was mostly from England, Western Europe, etc. And now a lot of it is South Asia. So it changes the dynamic, right? It changes the culture. And so they're grappling with that. There's a lot from English-speaking or prominently in English-speaking countries, but there's a lot from elsewhere as well, right? Look at this from Mexico back to Australia. So you've got this interactive capability. You can hover over these little, it's just amazing that you've got this at your fingertips. Again, imperfect, but very useful, could be useful for a course or two that you might teach, because you've got change over time and change over space. Let's take a look at this now. back on the local level, let's show this one map. And again, if you want to follow along, you're fine to do that. And then I want to have you make a map. I want to have you make a multimedia map, maybe a couple multimedia maps if you're willing to do it. First, I'm going to go. So I'm in my presentation. This is the same presentation that I've been using. I'm about maybe 40% of the way down in here, maybe 35% of the way down, something like that. But I'm on Make Your Own Map. Now let's look at demographic information from a national perspective to states, to counties, to census tracts, to block groups, which are basically neighborhoods, okay? And show you how to do that. So if I click in here on this link, I'm going to be in this mapping platform that we've been using. There are other mapping platforms, and we're going to tap into a little bit of those. Let's zoom out a little bit. So if you're there, let's zoom out a little bit. How's the bandwidth for you? Is it working okay?
It's all right.
It's slow? And you're on the DU Wi-Fi, or are you on EduRoam or something else?
Well,
Guest?
DU
Okay.
Wi-Fi,
All right.
because we don't have